This is Irene with Soga Talks. Hello and welcome. Welcome everyone here today. I am very excited to meet with Brett Good today. So Brett is a digital transformation expert. That's why I asked, and Brett kindly agreed to take part in Soga Talks because he is a CMO and co-founder of Intelligence Factory. And we will be talking a lot about digital business, digital transformation. We'll talk a lot about AI, and we'll talk about status of tech and business today. Welcome, Brett.
Thank you, Irene. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Pleasure is all mine. So absolutely everyone's busy trying to reinvent the new strategies and acting on those new strategies as we speak. One of my previous speakers mentioned that we're building airplane right now as we fly it. So what's your take on the state of business and people's minds at the moment, Brett?
That's actually a really great metaphor because what has happened is for years, the people that have been working in the intelligence factory, as well as people that have been working in digital transformation, have been trying to put the word of caution out that there is a change in the business world, which is referred to as the fourth industrial revolution. And this is going to require absolute change and shifts of how business is conducted, how businesses work, how they interact and engage with their employees as well as their customers, and how they view their own business processes and even their competition. And so for many years, we've been discussing this with business leaders, and up until this year, there was nothing too pressing unless you were in certain industries like retail where it was getting disrupted by companies like Amazon. But with COVID, the entire world has shifted, and suddenly everyone has realized that digital transformation really is something that they really need to do, as they've had to shift their business in many cases to completely online and digital-based systems.
Absolutely, because if that was a long kind of planned initiative, because I was working for big vendor for many years, right? I was an IBMer, and we were talking about for a long time how digital transformation is a must do. You will be behind if you're not doing it, right? And
right.
Big companies, smaller companies, right, try and push this agenda, but unless customers are really ready or unless they're pressed by circumstances, and I wish it would be different circumstances, not like this one, right?
Right.
We definitely see shifts to digital business. So what does it mean, Brett, digital business for the companies today?
Well, that's an important question. Before we go there, I do want to say that I think it's important to realize that a lot of people are looking at this moment in history and saying, how could we have seen this coming? Obviously, COVID is a disaster. It's not a good thing, and certainly digital transformation is not something that should be looked at as profiteering from it or taking advantage of the opportunity. Instead, it is a core underlying methodology of business that just so happens to be vital in now what is the post-COVID world. So with digital business, you're looking at taking a fresh look at how your business conducts business. It really starts with the vision of the leadership first. A lot of people talk about digital transformation, and they don't understand what it means. It's kind of a buzzword, kind of like artificial intelligence. It's thrown around a lot, and there's a lot of misunderstanding. So it's best to start with what it is and what it isn't. The first thing is it does start with the vision of a leader. It starts with the CEO and goes down from there. And the CEO has to realize and understand what digital transformation means and what digital business means before they can come up with some sort of vision for their organization. But that vision will come in part from understanding the organization's data. Whether or not they have purposely been collecting and organizing their data through the years, or if it's just something that they have access to through phone records or whatever forms of data a company has, they do have data, and the opportunities to gather additional data exist. It's just a question of whether or not they have been putting an effort towards that. The importance of the data in this new model of business is that this is where your decision making comes from. If you're not using your data to make decisions and to make purchases and plans, you're literally just guessing. And yes, that is the way it's been going for years. That's the way business has been. You've been doing things, and they have words like forecasting and, fancy words, so it doesn't sound too random and freak out the shareholders. But really, it's educated guesses that have been taking place in most business decisions. Now, with the availability of data as well as tools that you can use to interpret that data, you can actually have some very strong forecasting tools. Artificial intelligence and machine learning is designed to be able to provide you with trends and forecasting. And obviously it doesn't see the future, but it gives you an insight into what may happen as you're going forward. Now, the interesting thing is understanding that nobody knew COVID was going to come. There have been some research that was done on pandemics, but no one knew what that would look like. And so it's not possible for anyone to have really truly prepared for COVID. That being said, there are some organizations that people have looked at and said, well, it's almost like they were prepared for this because they've made the transition from prior to COVID to now so smoothly that it almost seemed like they knew it was coming. And the answer is on those, that's just because they had already begun a digital transformation. A digital transformation is not an end-to-end process. It doesn't start and then end one day. It is an ongoing state of business. It's a transformation in the way business is conducted. And so you have your data, you have your vision from your corporate leader. The very next thing is not throwing technology into the mix. It's engaging your employees, your people. And this is where a lot of organizations really have missed the mark. They've misunderstood that your organization is full of subject matter experts, SMEs or SMEs, whatever you want to call them. They are the subject matter experts within their own area of knowledge, whether they're answering phone calls from customers or they're doing data entry, or maybe they're higher up in the organization and they're a manager. They know their particular area of business better than anyone else. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of ego in business through the years, and people get into executive roles and they think that means that they're above everyone else, though structurally they might be, but as a person, they're not. And the insights that you can get from people that work in your organization are huge. And that's why you've got a TV show like Undercover Boss, where the executives go and see what it's like to work at the company, but really what they're doing is they're getting insight from their employees. And the show goes off in its own little direction, but what that is listening to your employees, which is a huge part of digital transformation. It's respecting and realizing that you have people that are actually very smart and very good at their jobs in your company, and you want to take advantage of that in the most profitable way for the company, which is to listen to them and rely on their knowledge. Because although you might not have realized it before, they are truly the expert on whatever their domain is. So that is really important to be able to learn from your staff and to leverage that.
This speaks volume to me. This speaks volume to me, Brad, because my background is in business process automation, and decision management. And I've met so many fantastic customers and partners over the years who just translated that exact message. Teams will be on board with any transformational effort, however unknown it is, however uncertain it is, right? But if you make people feel inclusive, and it's definitely failure when, again, it's just top-down initiative with, again, nobody, feel related to. So absolutely, culture change
That's right.
is a major factor here.
Yeah. And then what you get there then is with this opportunity of listening to your staff and looking at your data and understanding your business in a new way, you have the ability to make decisions where you're mitigating against risk by looking at history, looking at your past, and looking at the insights coming from your own staff, telling you, hey, this is a real thing. It might be a competitor that they see on the horizon that you don't see yet. And, you hear about disruption. That's essentially what that is just a competitor that's found a better way of doing the same business or a new approach to doing the same market, but it might not be the same business. And it ends up disrupting large organizations that might have thought of themselves as completely safe. You know, you hear about Blockbuster Video and Kodak and companies like that. It's not just an anecdote. These are huge companies that are getting disrupted in massive ways. And I read a stat fairly recently that the majority of the Fortune 500, so more than 50% of the Fortune 500 companies in the last 20 years, half of them have disappeared. And it's amazing when you actually look at the numbers and look at the company names and you're like, yeah, Xerox is not the same company they used to be. And, you know, IBM even, you know, they are not the company they were. I grew up in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley. I know exactly who IBM was, and they're not the company that they were at one point in time. And there's a lot of change that's taken place in business as, you know, we went through the third industrial revolution and we had computers and the change with the internet and having websites and things like that. You think about businesses today and try and imagine or try and think of a business that has not embraced those elements of the third industrial revolution. Someone that doesn't do, you know, their accounting on a computer, if they're doing it by paper, they're not scalable. They can't grow to the scale that companies need to be able to grow to. Or maybe they don't use computers at all, or maybe they've rejected, you know, having email, or for that matter, they could reject using the telephone. And a business is not going to survive, you know, if they reject the changes that happen in an industrial revolution.
Let me throw this question here at you, Brett, okay? Sure. So I know many companies rejected remote work before, okay? Yeah. I was lucky. I was so lucky in early 2000s when IBM made this leap and it allowed to find the best talent across the country and the world, okay? So we were able to work remotely successfully. I am a big proponent for that. Mm-hmm. Yet so many companies were really under impression that no, this is for security reasons, for whatever. It's easy for managers to see their employees day to day, number of reasons, right? So how do you think this is changing now?
Well, obviously with COVID, there's a massive shift and companies are stepping back and saying, wow, this isn't as bad as we thought it would be. You know, if they haven't explored allowing remote work, it's just been a fear factor for them. And you can't make decisions in business based on fear. A perfect example of a fear-based decision, if you remember back many, many years ago, the Sony Walkman was the thing to have at one point in time in the 80s. The cassette deck that, you know, had the headphones, and everybody had to have those. You know, I was in high school when that was happening. And so, you know, if you didn't have a Walkman, you weren't cool. And so it was more than just a piece of equipment. It was a fashion accessory. It was everything. Sony actually came up with the concept for an MP3 player that basically was exactly like the Walkman, but it was basically what an iPod would be. And they chose not to release it because they were afraid that they would disrupt their own market that they had. They had 100% ownership of the market. Yeah, there was other companies that sold cassette decks and things, but they were the Walkman. You know, they were branded and everybody had to have one. And so they chose not to do a digital Walkman. And Apple came along and ultimately disrupted that entire market. And, you know, obviously Apple wasn't worried about what would happen to Sony. Sony was worried. And so they didn't do something, and they avoided it because of their own fear of disrupting their own market.
You know, this is so funny, Brett, that you bring up this example. I'm thinking that Sony was thinking about the next horse.
Yes.
Okay? While Steve Jobs did something different. All right. So yeah, exactly. Fantastic example. Yeah.
Now it's funny too, because, you know, not to heap praise on Apple for this, but in the same example, Apple disrupted the iPod when they released the iPhone. They pretty much made the iPod kind of non-existent. It exists today, obviously, but you don't have to have it like you did when they first came out. And, you know, now the phone itself has all the functionality of the iPod. Apple knew that releasing the iPhone was going to pretty much kill the market for the iPod, but they knew that that's what was needed. They knew that it was a choice that needed to be made. And yeah, holding back out of fear is a losing game. So that's part of why all these elements are so important. And when you have companies that have staff members that are saying, hey, I would be more effective if I could work from home, or, people that in Silicon Valley where they commute for 2 hours each way because they can't afford to live in the Bay Area, those people are exhausted when they get to work. And frankly, they would love to be able to work from home, and they would be more productive if they did. And so some of the companies that have been holding off on this for years, for political reasons or just personal choice, they kind of were forced to move into it all of a sudden. And the stakes were high, because if they didn't make it so that their employees could work from home, they basically had no way to have their employees work. With COVID, you couldn't obviously have people in the office, and those examples became very publicly known when it happened. And so it was a PR nightmare as well as a physical danger for all the staff members. And then people were quitting, and it was a business nightmare. And these are the same exact things that people talking about digital transformation have been kind of warning about for years. It's not about COVID, it's about change in business. And COVID in this case was the catalyst that forced that change.
Absolutely, and providing more freedoms and flexibility to your employees, right? It's not about letting people do whatever they want, whenever they want, but really feeling that you are able to define your own day and kind of work around how you want to live your life. It's a huge plus. It's a huge plus. For me, it was a huge factor for staying with IBM for all these years, frankly. Okay, and the moment that changed 3 years ago, my decision was to quit. So all I'm saying is it's interesting. It's interesting time we live in. We touched on innovation. Okay, we did touch on disruptors here. So Brad, where do you think this innovation is happening now? When everyone's scrambling, everyone is just thinking and calculating, right? What my next 6 months gonna be? Is it big tech players? Is it smaller vendors? How do you see this whole universe?
Well, first of all, I think, again, COVID has kind of forced the hand of a lot of companies, both large and small. So they're kind of in a situation where they have to listen to their employees, whether or not they've gone through some sort of digital transformation formally. They have to listen to their employees, and they're having to do things like telework or working from home, and they're having to explore new business avenues. Some of the companies' models are completely gone, like buffet restaurants. Many of them are just saying we're done and closing. So you've got this innovation that has to take place, and it's not coming from the boardroom, and it's not coming from the C-suite. It's coming from their employees that are saying, hey, here's an idea. Here's an area we could explore. Here's something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and no one's listened to me yet. And now they're listening, because companies are saying, we're in trouble if we can't find a way through this. And so a big part of that innovation is coming from one of the tenets of digital transformation, which is listening to your staff members. And part of digital transformation is also to create a culture within your organization of fostering innovation and invention and iteration of the company, to be open to change. So you have a culture of change. Prior to COVID, and certainly during it, most companies viewed change as a negative, a huge negative. And they wanted things to be, a model. We follow this and we earn this. And that was the business model. And that's what they're going to stick with. And that's a pre-industrial revolution 4 type thinking in business. You can't assume that your business model that works today is going to work tomorrow. And whether it's an outside company that comes in and disrupts you, or if it's something like COVID, or maybe it's something else that we haven't encountered yet, change will come. It's just a question of how you're going to respond to it. And so that innovation becomes a lifeblood for an organization. And we touched on Apple and Sony and the problem that they went through with Sony not innovating, even though they had the answer. Kodak designed and developed the digital camera, but they knew that it was going to kill off film, and so they didn't want to release it. But they had a digital camera for many years. This kind of innovation that takes place has to be done fearlessly. There's a phrase I like to use, doing a fearless personal inventory, where you look at yourself as a person and say, what do I need to do that would be better to make me into a better person? And companies need to be doing the exact same thing. And that means the executives have to be humble enough to say, hey, you know what? this worked yesterday, but it's not necessarily going to work tomorrow. So let's take a real look at what we're doing and find the best way of being a better company. And that innovation in many cases will come from their customers. If they actually speak to and listen to their customers will tell them what they need, regardless of what industry they're in. If it's B2B, B2C, it doesn't matter. If you listen to your customers, they'll give you insight and they'll give you ideas. They'll just give them to you. And it's one of the most effective ways for organizations to change.
Absolutely. Interesting that you're mentioning, because when you kind of remodeling your own house, you don't invite guests. But question will be, when you undergoing major transformational initiative as a company, okay, how do you keep your clients kind of along that path?
Well, part of it is if you're listening to your customers, you're engaging with them, you are doing exactly what they need. If you're looking to them for your innovation and saying, what is it that we could do that would really help you? Or asking your customer, this is a big thing to do in the B2B world, what is your biggest problem in your business right now? And perhaps we can find a way to solve it for you. And sometimes they can, sometimes they can't, but at least they're asking the question, and that serves to engage the customer in a new way, because you're showing them that you're interested in their business and their success, not just your own. And so that's vital. But also just the concept of listening to and engaging with your customers goes into the whole area of customer experience. And again, it doesn't matter what field you're in, it doesn't matter what your product or service is. If you're not engaging your customer, if you're not making them thrilled with what it is you're serving them or giving them, or selling to them or creating for them, it doesn't matter what it is. If you're not truly engaging them and getting their love, getting their appreciation, then you're failing yourself as well as your customers. So the biggest thing is to find what your customer needs, find out where their pain points are, and create and iterate your own business around your customers to come up with solutions that will truly meet their needs and thrill them.
Yep. Sounds good. Sounds easier than really making it happen, So early on, Brett, you mentioned company acquiring more data, right? Data was on everybody's mind. It was natural resource. It was this and that. Lots of sayings flying around about data. So I spoke with Jim Siner about dark data early this year. Okay, it's all the company log files and all the dark data that nobody's taking advantage of at the moment. So how do you think AI is playing the role in getting more clarity, in making better decisions there? Because I know answer to that question changes year to year and month to month, I guess. So what's the latest on that?
It definitely does change. And really the answer is the technology of machine learning has the ability to take in a vast amount of information and then find patterns and trends in that information. It doesn't matter what you're looking at. One of the areas I like to use as an example is when you get a job at a company, no matter what your role is, if it's a desk job, on day one, typically they'll bring you some big catalog and say, pick out your desk set and the tape and stapler and paperclip holder. Go ahead and pick one out from the catalog and we'll order it for you. And it cracks me up because at most of the jobs that I've had through the years, I don't use the stapler or paper clips or any of those things. It's a waste. And so when I'm talking to companies about how they should be using their data, and dark data in this case, looking at numbers of how many people are actually printing out more than one page, and of those people, are they actually stapling them? And it sounds silly, but if you realize that this can be applied on a much higher level to all aspects of your business, it actually becomes something where you go, this actually might make some sense. Because in the case of staplers, I think the numbers would show that the vast majority of people don't need a stapler on their desk. And what's more, they don't need paperclip holders and all these different things that people pick out every time someone new comes into the company. Or even if you're a temp in a lot of companies, they'll say, go ahead and pick out something. And I used to have some fun with that when I was a temp. And I'd say, okay, and see if I could get them to buy me a new desk or something, because it was mindless. There was no thinking involved. And in much the same way, you have software licensing, you have companies that are just throwing technology in their organization, and they're not looking at the data to make the decisions on whether or not that's needed. And if large companies are known for anything, they're known for waste. And this is a huge area where there's vast amounts of money that could be tapped if they were not buying staplers, as an example. Obviously, some need staplers, and I'm not against staplers or anything like that, but using the data that you have, finding out, how many people are actually using this, or does everyone need a printer on their desktop, or what about these chairs? Are they actually helping people, or are they hurting them? Every area of business can be explored, and if you've been capturing data, and every organization does, you have ways of going through that data, exploring it, and with machine learning, you can have insights come from it that'll actually give you something that you can take action on. And the shifts that happen in companies that take advantage of their own data can be massive. And they discover new business lines, they discover areas where they can save massive amounts of money. It's vital to do that.
Yeah, where do you think we all are in AI adoption cycle, so to speak, right? Because I think the first disillusionment came, I think the first disappointments came after, right, everybody was thinking, hey, my whole world is going to change, I'm going to adapt the AI, I'm going to implement it in my processes, in my operations, right, and I'll all be golden. So where do you think the reality is right now, and who are those who are succeeding now?
AI is another one of those, those words that has a lot of weight, and people think of movies, they think of, the Terminator and Skynet and things like that. And then you also have people that they don't understand what it means, and the concept of artificial intelligence is lost on them. And that's all right. You're not born with that knowledge. You're not supposed to have it. You have to learn it. AI is not necessarily a part of digital transformation. But AI is one of the tools that if your company is transforming, you'll want to take advantage of it, because it's going to help you with insights. It's going to help you with forecasting, things like that. So in the pre-COVID world, a lot of organizations were experimenting with AI. And part of what we're hearing at the Intelligence Factory from the companies that we're engaging with is that a lot of organizations had ideas, they had plans in place for things they wanted to roll out utilizing AI and machine learning, in some cases autonomous systems, things like that. It's all in the same area. And they were looking towards this next year as an opportunity to implement. And when COVID first hit, a lot of these same organizations said, oh, we need to stop. And they tried to figure out how to handle their staff and the issues that suddenly arose. And then it's almost like everybody took a breath and then said, I guess we should still keep doing everything we were already doing with AI and machine learning. So the same organizations are jumping back on board and saying, okay, now we need to do this more than ever. And they've realized that these important projects that companies have been looking at are more vital than ever. And so that's happening with the organizations that have been looking at it. The organizations that hadn't been planning to have any sort of AI rolled out prior to COVID are starting to ask those questions now. How could it possibly benefit us? And these are, in some cases, they're small businesses where they've heard that there's some tools they might be able to use for insights. There's systems that they might be able to take advantage of. The assumption is that everything's too expensive, and that it's custom made, that they have to hire some data scientists to come and build them some complex thing. But the reality is, you can go on to the app stores and you can get AI driven applications that are smart and will actually help in whatever area you're looking at. So it's a question of what can the technology be done, what can be done with the technology rather, in your line of business to help your customers, to help your business in your core functions. And it all kind of points back to first going through the process of a digital transformation. Before you start throwing technology at something, you want to have a use case, you want to have an understanding of it. And so you want to go through those first steps of utilizing the data you have and empowering your employees. Even if you've only got 1 or 2 employees, listen to them and learn from them, and then start looking at ideas that can come through the technology and ways you can utilize it.
Brett, this is enormous. Thank you so very much. So to wrap this up, okay, we did talk about digital transformation from many angles, including, of course, those who are affected inside of the organization and outside of the organization, right? Customer, clients, and partners, you name it, right? So how would you summarize maybe 3 takeaways of success factors for those who are, doing digital transformation already, and for those who are really forced to embark on that journey now?
The thing to remember is that mistakes in business, when you make a mistake and you are doing it based on the data of your company, it's not a loss. It might be a financial loss at first, but it's not a problem. And a lot of organizations struggle with this, because this is where the vision of the leadership is important, because they need to take responsibility for a decision and allow their staff members to not get caught up in, the blame game, as many people call it. So with digital transformation and with business today, when you are looking at exploring some sort of an idea, you want to try a test and see if a certain system is going to do something to help you. It has to be decided on based on your data. It has to be something that you explore first before you just jump into it. So you're not just throwing money at your IT department. And if you are making decisions and taking these experiments from a data driven perspective, then if something goes wrong, you're not making a mistake. You can learn from it and grow, and then iterate that decision or that experiment and do it again in a different way. You learn from it and move on. You don't sit back and go, oh, well, forget it. You want to take those learning opportunities, even from mistakes that you might be making in business, as long as you are making those experiments based on your data and your staff and all the indicators in your organization. If you're making smart decisions, if you're utilizing the tools, and you want to try something, don't expect it to work on day one, but try it, do experiments, and let it be okay for failure to take place, because very few real big experiments work on the first try, first of all. But once you've learned from your first mistake, then you apply that and you try it again, and you keep trying. It's this iteration of your business, an iteration of ideas and creativity. You will eventually succeed in coming up with something. But what you don't want to do is start with an enterprise-wide experiment. You want to start small. And you don't have to throw huge budgets at digital transformation. You don't have to throw huge budgets into IT just to try something. You want to start small, try an idea on a small scale, test it out, see if it works. And if it does, scale it. And if it doesn't, then you iterate. You learn from it and grow and move forward. And the leadership has to take responsibility when something goes wrong. They have to say, okay, that's on me. Everybody else, you did your job. Let's try it again, but let's do this time. And so you're constantly in this state of iteration and creating and growing and change. And it's okay. Unlike previously when change was looked at as a bad thing, it's a good thing in the fourth industrial revolution.
Perfect, Brett. Thank you so very much for the talk today. So please come back to Soga Talks when you have something new to share with the audience, because this is enormous and this is iterative process for me. Okay, I am transforming my life, right? I'm trying something new, and if I'm failing, like you said, I'm using data. YouTube provides enormous amount of analytics now. Okay, right. Where we see what stuck, what didn't, So absolutely, I am part of that experiment, and I'm happy to report to the audiences how that is gonna go. But yeah, absolutely. Come back. It was fun. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me.